Robert George Scholten. I was born in Chicago, Illinois, in the city on the south side.
Do you have any family members that are serving or have served in the military?
Yeah, my father served in World War II and had an uncle. One of his brothers served in World War I and was gassed. On my mom's side, an uncle on mom's side was also in World War I and was gassed. And I had other uncles and cousins in World War II and in Korea and in Vietnam.
What were you doing before you entered the service?
I was in high school. I was born with many learning disabilities, which they didn't know in the 50s and 60s. And so I was pushing 16 when they finally said you don't belong in grade school anymore. So I couldn't get into a high school, so they put me in a trade school. And in 1969, I was let go out of the trade school, but the learning disabilities were fully involved, and I could barely read, I could barely write. I was 19 and a half. I didn't know the alphabet. I didn't know how to spell my middle name, which was George, and many other stuff. I was a mess. However, I was a Christian. I just didn't believe that God could do stuff with me. You know, I was doomed. And so I thought, well, I majored in welding, but I had to, as a functional illiterate, I got a lot of people to do my stuff for me, how to turn stuff on and that. That's what functional illiterate does. You know, and so anyway, I realized I won't make it in Chicago. I wouldn't make it. And so I went into the military, thinking, well, I could survive there. And I told people I went in to be a witness as a Christian, but the real reason was I feared living in Chicago because I couldn't function. And also that I would go in as a Christian. So I went in almost right out of high school, because in Chicago they were drafting at 19 and a half, and I was 19 and a half. I didn't want to go in the Navy, because I don't know how 500 tons of metal float, and I can't outswim the shark. I didn't want to go in the Air Force, because I wasn't smart enough. Marines scared me, and so I went in the Army, because my dad was in the Army. That was in 1969, I went in.
What happened when you departed for training camp and during your early days of training?
My dad died shortly before I went in the military, and the last thing he said, well, he was in the VA hospital, and he was watching the news about Vietnam, and he said, that darn war, but he didn't use the word darn. And then he said, Bob, I hope you never go in the military, but if you do, go in the Navy. Don't go in the Army. And I went in the Army, and I went to, I was at Fort Jackson, South Carolina for boot camp. And my first night there, I said I should have listened to my dad. But I'd do it again. I was totally ignorant. I never had a weapon in my hand before. And the first night they said, we're going to have a GI party. I go, hey, this is fun. I didn't realize what it was. A GI party was you stripped down a perfectly good floor, and then you had to put more wax on it and buff it. I thought it was going to be a nice party. So I had to learn a whole new language. And with my disabilities, learning came very slow. And so, you know, it was hard, but I kept going. And my faith in Christ kept me going.
Did you receive any specialized training?
I was trained after boot camp. I got my double pneumonia in boot camp. I was really sick. And I had about a week and a half to go. And at that time, if you missed more than 3 days, you had to go through boot camp again. My first day in the hospital, I didn't even know I was there. I woke up the next night, and I go, where am I? He says, you're in the hospital. Okay? And so the second day, the third day, I'm still sick. I'm terrible sick. And I'm begging the doctors, let me go, let me go, let me go. And they says, you can't go. I says, I can't take boot camp again. Let me go. So they let me go. Oh, every step I took, my head just pounded. Well, that day we had to go to range. I forgot what the range was, like 5 miles out. So I had to march out there. My head is just splitting. I can barely breathe. And I get out there and qualify. I can't even see the targets. I got the worst score in the camp history. And the sergeant called me all kinds of names, but my worst score still might be the worst score. From there, I went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, to be trained as an engineer. And I was totally out of my element because I could barely read. And so I had all these manuals I had to read and learn how to drive a truck and all this stuff. So once again, I'm faking my way through, getting people to do stuff for me, and I made it through. Okay. However, the Army only needed so many engineers, so the rest of us went elsewhere. And they sent me to Fort Hood, Texas, to drive M60 tanks. I absolutely loved it. So I drove M60 tanks and M48 tanks. I just loved it. Okay? And there was one time where we're on maneuvers, and the whole, I was in 2nd Armored Division. The whole division's out, and there's plateaus in Fort Hood area. Well, our tank breaks down. We lose our brakes, which are hydraulic, and we also lose our radio, and so we can't find anyone else. I'm a Dutchman. I'm down in the front. I'm the driver. We have Shake and Bake as a lieutenant. You know, he's the tank commander. American Indian as a gunner, and down in the belly is a Hispanic. Okay, so up on top is the commander and the Indian and myself. And anyway, the American Indian hooks up portable radio to the intercom system. We're listening to country and western, trying to find these other 50-ton tanks, 50-ton tanks. We can't find them. Well, we come up to a ridge, and they're way down at the bottom, and they look like a bunch of little toys. And the lieutenant says, Scholten, we gotta go down. I go, sir, we have no brakes. He says, Scholten, we gotta go down. I go, sir, we have no brakes. He says, Scholten, do you like your stripes? I go, yes, sir. He says, go down. Well, I'm sitting about this far off the ground because I'm the driver. And so very nervously, I stick it in first, and that tank, boom, goes down. And to the right, there's a cliff. To the left, there's a huge ditch. And I'm so nervous that when I put it in gear, and I take my hand off, I knock it in neutral. And 50 tons, instantly, pow, it's going down this thing. It seemed like it took 2 minutes, but it was just seconds. We're going down. And I look at my speedometer, it's like this. I'm praying out loud. Everyone hears this in the intercom. I'm praying out loud. The American Indian's going, Yahoo, because he thinks I'm doing it on purpose. The lieutenant is cursing, and the Hispanic down the belly is saying something in Spanish. This is all going on at one time. And we're going down so fast. And, I'm going, oh, we're doomed. Now the guys down the bottom are jumping off their tanks and think this fool's going to hit us. I go, hang on, I hit the ditch. And we come out airborne, destroy this guy's fence, make a plow into his field, then hit some trees and they're going down. And finally we come to a stop. I can't even get my hands off the wheel. I can't get them off. And the American Indian jumps off the tank, which is pretty high, and he runs towards the Russian guy, jumps up, clips his heels together, and says, "What a ride!" He thought I did it on purpose. And the lieutenant gets off, stands right in front of me, he's cursing at me. I grew up in Chicago, and this guy's saying stuff I never heard, and he's cursing at me. Then he leaves, and I forgot about the Hispanic. Finally, he comes out, says something in Spanish to me. Didn't know if he was praying or whatever he was doing. But when we got off maneuvers, he re-enlisted for an infantry group. But I was sitting in that tank by myself, and I could barely get my hands off the wheel because I was just petrified. I go, God, what happened? I was in full control. And he spoke to my heart and said, Robert, when you're in control, you're out of control. When you're out of control, you'll take lives with you. And within a month, I was in Vietnam. And I never forgot that. That when I'm in control, I'm out of control. And if I'm out of control, I'll take lives with me. And so that I learned that at Fort Hood. And then I never dreamed I'd be in Vietnam because I was sole surviving son. My dad just died prior to me going in the military. And I came down on a levee, and I couldn't believe it. I went to my first sergeant and said, I'm sole surviving son. This can't be happening. He went and looked into it and says, Robert, they no longer do that. And so one of the hardest things I had to do in my life was to call home. And I had two sisters. And I said, Mom's not on the phone. And she says, no. My older sister. I said, I came down levee for Vietnam. And she said, you volunteered. No, I didn't. She swore, I did not volunteer. I didn't know my mom was on the phone. And it about killed her. So, yeah, it was, that was a very terrifying time. And so I got a 30-day leave. And, just, what do you do in 30 days? It goes by very fast. You say your goodbyes and you hope that it won't be a real goodbye, and you get everything in order. And I went over as a replacement. And I thought that I'd be, this was in 1970. And I thought I was be going over to drive a tank. And so I go, okay, I can handle that. So I get to Vietnam. I didn't know a soul. When we're flying in, I looked at, it was at night. I look out, had the misfortune of seeing a firefight. And I go, oh Lord, what am I getting into? I see the tracers, Americans, we had red tracers, Viet Cong had green. And you can see this, and we land, and well, I think it was about 2 days later, a day or 2 days later, I can't remember now, but anyway, I was told that I'd be going into artillery. I go, artillery? I don't know the first thing about artillery. I was engineer, I drove tanks. Okay, I drove tanks for 6 months. I'm a tank driver. He said, don't worry about it. It was an old tank. They took the turret off, and they put a tub on it, and it has 2 barrels. I'm speechless. I go, I'm thinking of a bathtub, and 2 barrels. I just can't figure this thing out. And this is, it's a small tank, it's open turret, and it's 4th to the 60th, 4th Battalion, 60th Artillery, and Charlie Battery. I go, well, what's Charlie Battery? The guy's face just turned white and says, you'll find that out too. Come to find out, it was an anti-aircraft division. It was not used against aircraft, but against personnel. It was 40 millimeters. We could fire up to 240 in a minute. We also had an M60 machine gun on it. and it weighed half what the M60 did. It was 25 tons. I had a crew of 5. There was 4 up in the turret, and a driver. And when I saw that, I couldn't believe it. I just could not believe it. I thanked God that I'd be a driver, because I wouldn't want to be up in a turret to be responsible to fire that thing. I shook. You know, I never saw anything like this. My first, it was, well, day 2 came, and I think it was, and they said, we're going to train you how to drive this thing. I was used to driving an M60 tank. And so, long story short, I blew my driving test. Okay? I drove it like a tank, rather than an open turret. And these guys are hanging on for life. Okay, and I get to the end, and I thought I did a real good job, like a male peacock. I'm just ready for my sergeant to give me, boy, you drove good. He jumps off, and I'm wondering, why is this guy's knuckles white? And his face is beet red, you know, and he was hanging on for dear life. And he just cursed me out, and he says, a driver you're not. And my life just sunk. And right then, the Lord just spoke to my heart and said, when you're out of control, when you're in control, you're out of control. I forgot the lesson. And then 2 days later, I was told that I'd be a gunner. And that was the beginning of my nightmare. So I was attached to 173rd Infantry in the Central Highlands, and at times also on the Central Coastal Land. And we'd escort the infantry out. They weren't in our 173rd that we were with. They were in trucks, and so we'd take them out and be with them and guard them, or take them to a position and then protect them as far as we could, and then when go back and pick them up. Also, we guard combat engineers and go out and protect them. And then our day would begin before dawn, and then we'd get ready, we'd go pick them up, and if we'd stay out there, we could stay out for weeks, okay, and just, or we'd take them out, bring them back in, and then we'd have perimeter guard. They'd have to come through us, enemy had to come through us, and we pull 2 2-hour guard duties, which meant that we got anywhere from 2 to 4 hours of sleep a night. That was it. And then up again, do the whole thing again. And so the whole time I was in Vietnam, the most I ever got to sleep was probably around 4 hours a night. And so and I buried everything. I buried so much that when I got home, people say, well, you're in combat. I said, I saw it. Or no. And I just buried it. And I didn't know how much I buried until the first time I went to a reunion 30-some years later. See, I never knew any guy's names. Well, we went by nicknames in case someone got killed. We're going to say that was John. Well, that was just Gomer. My nickname was Preacher. And so these guys are talking about stuff. I go, what are you talking about? And I go, Scholten, you were there. And stuff started coming back. But after I survived Vietnam without a wound, which was amazing. Because there's times where the rounds went right between us. You know, one time we're going through a village, and my cannoneer behind me, they'd stand up and feed this thing. You know, there's 4 clips to it, 4 rounds to a clip, and they'd have to stand up and feed the breech. There's 2 cannoneers. At the whole time they're firing at us. And anyway, we were going through a village, so we're seated, and Gomer was behind me, and he starts slapping my helmet from behind me. He says, "Preacher, you're hit, you're hit." I go, "What are you talking about?" 'Cause you can barely hear each other because, you know, the engine behind us and the air, open to it. He says, "You're hit." Unbeknown to us, they opened fire on us, and all the rounds went between us. Unbelievable, you know. And that happened quite a few times. I was sniped at a few times. One time I was sitting on a ledge, it's a mountaintop, and beautiful day, absolutely beautiful. I open up my Bible, and I'm reading my Bible, and I'm going, just moving my feet like this, oblivious where I'm at. You know? I'm just enjoying the time. And also when I feel something go through my hair, and my head went like this, pressure my head went like this, and I felt the bullet split my hair, and then I heard poof, and sniper just, he split my hair. And I never turned so fast, and what I learned in boot camp came back real quick. I turned, low crawled to my track, and I said 2 prayers very quickly. Thank you, God, for saving my life, and forgive me for being so stupid. I forgot where I was. You know, and so by God's grace, I made it through. But I forgot, I remember some of the funny stuff and some of the things like that. But I buried everything else. I went from there to Fort Bliss, Texas, and was in missiles. And then I got an early out. I just got out. And I lived, to be honest, I lived to be 50. Because I was told that 50 you couldn't be drafted again. There was no way I ever wanted to be in a war again. And so I lived to be 50. Yeah. And so war changes people. It definitely does. And I didn't realize how much it changed me.
Where were you when the war ended?
Excuse me?
Where were you when the war ended?
I was in, 1973 is when they pulled all the troops out. I was in college. I never dreamed I'd be in college. But I was in Northwestern College, Orange City, Iowa. And it was tough. You know, it's a unique thing happened at Orange City, Iowa. As I mentioned, I could barely read and write. My first semester I started in January. My Western man, he said, you got to write a paper. It's just 1-page paper, won't take long. He didn't know me. And it took me all night. And in that, I got my paper back and had F- on it. And the guy ran out of red ink and went to green ink, and across it wrote, "This is not college level work," and then scratch that out. "This is not high school level work." And I will say this, that if I wasn't a veteran, and if I did not experience Vietnam, I would have walked out. That would have been it. But what I learned and endured, I knew I had to endure it. And so that's one thing, a positive thing that came out of Vietnam. That that you stick to it. You just, no matter what, you stick to it.
Were you awarded any special recognition for your service?
The one thing that I hold dearest was I was totally unprepared for it. Last year at my unit reunion, it's called the Fivecoait and Searchlight. We're a specialized unit. It's the highest decorated artillery unit in the war. I didn't know it at the time. And I was awarded the Chapel to 4 chaplains. This is the U.S. Dorchester. I have time to share this. U.S. Dorchester, I knew about this, but I didn't know the full story. The U.S. Dorchester was a troop ship, and I think it had like 400 men on 400. I forgot how many men. There's quite a few on it. Most of them were Army. There was a few sailors on it, a couple of civilians. And in February 1943, it was going to Greenland, and there was some other ships as well, and they knew that there was a German submarine, and so they're zigzag. But anyway, it was torpedoed, and it was at night, and it went down so fast, the Dorchester. But anyway, what made the Dorchester so unique was that there were probably well over 3/4 of the men died. But there was 4 chaplains. There was a rabbi, Jewish rabbi, a Catholic priest, a Methodist pastor, and a Dutch Reformed pastor, which I'm Dutch Reformed. And they were handing out life jackets to the men, and they were handing them all out and encouraging them, praying with them, reading scriptures to them. Well, they ran out of life jackets, so they took off their life jackets and gave it to the men. And there's witnesses of this. And as the ship went down, the stern went down last, and they saw the 4 chaplains arm in arm, singing hymns and praying for the men, and they met their doom. And then in 1951 or 1953, President Eisenhower dedicated the chapel to 4 chaplains, and it's for anyone. I didn't know at the time. I thought it was just for the 4 chaplains. But what he also did at that time is that a certain amount of people could be inducted into the chapel of 4 chaplains in honor of humanitarian things that they do, mostly in the military, but also civilian. I didn't know about that. And last year at my reunion, I was inducted into the chapel of 4 chaplains and received the Legion of Honor Award. And there was just 4 of us, and they pinned a pin on me. I was going to bring it, I forgot it. It is a gold Star of David on the outside to represent the rabbi, and a cross of Jesus in the middle to represent the 3 Protestants. And he kissed me here, and he kissed me here, and he said, the Star of David and the cross of Jesus Christ, never be ashamed of neither. Okay? It's a military award. I was floored. And then yesterday, I received information from the chapel that makes it even more humbling. Is that less than 200 of us worldwide received that last year. And so it's, I'm just extremely humbled by it.
Have you remained in contact with any fellow veterans or been reunited with any fellow veterans?
As I mentioned, we always went by nicknames. And we were very tight, very tight, but we just, you know, the only person's name I knew was Bill Hill. We reversed it and called him Hillbilly. And my prayer was, God, I'd love to meet some of my men afterwards. After I still pray for them by nickname. And it was 35 years later, I met my very first. It was my very first one. And Chief, we always call him Chief. And then the second one, he was over both tracks. We went by 2 tracks. We always went in sister tracks. So there's 5 on each track, and then a chief between, so there's 11 of us. And we became so close. I can still hear their breaths. You know, you could tell who's breathing. You know, and you still hear their voices. And it's if I didn't know their names. And so but 35 years later, and then 36, he was chief. He was on the other track. And the next year, I met Robin. We called him Bird because his name was Robin. And he was the very first one that was on my track that I met, and so far, the only one. And 2 years ago, my kidneys failed. And I was in the VA here in Lexington for 3 days. And they released me. And after they released me on Palm Sunday, and 2 weeks later, I thought I'd better really read my release forms. The first one I read said, released patient in fair condition. I go, my goodness, what was I going in? And the second one said, resuscitate, no. I go, oh, I didn't say that. The third one said, it was, they called in hospice on me. They didn't think I was going to live. And Robin, I think it was 2 days after I got back, my wife must have called him. He lives in Massachusetts. And I got a phone call from him. Okay. And the only time I saw him was at a reunion. And he says, preacher, there's only 3 of us left. Out of both crews, there's only 3 of us left. It is. I'm a registered nurse in the VA. If you need me, I'm coming down right now. No, it's now he has cancer. I caught him. Robin. If you need me, I'll be here. You know, it's you know, we're tight. Even though we don't see much other.
What have you done since you separated from the military?
First of all, I ran from God. Wanted me to go into the. I received a calling. The Lord spoke to my heart that I had to go into ministry. I didn't want to. And so I ran. It's a whole different story. I was working at a Christian Christian Servicemen Center. These back in the 60s and 70s were around major bases. And the person in charge of it said, you ought to go to college. So anyway, I went to college. And graduated from Northwestern College. Then went to New Brunswick Seminary in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and survived that. And then I've been serving churches. My first church was upstate New York, and then went to South Dakota, and then from South Dakota out to Washington State, back to South Dakota, to Iowa, to here. And what I didn't know what I was doing is that I was running, you know, and PTSD, people with PTSD handled me. I ran, and it just when we're on a duster, we're never in a place long. You know, we're all over the place, and I took that with me. Never got much sleep. And I took that with me, and not knowing what I was doing, I'd be in a place, and after a year I was ready to leave, and I stuck it out. It wasn't until recently, through the efforts of the VA here and the care I'm getting, that I had to admit what I was doing. You know, that PTSD had me, and didn't know what it was, didn't know the depths of it, and then in 2007, here, my life fell apart, and my wife was in Minnesota. I can't remember if it was her dad or her mom was dying, so I drove her all the way up to Minnesota, and I drove all the way back. And boy, just my two adult daughters are with us, living with us, and my life, I didn't even know what was happening to me. My daughters went to one of the persons over me and said, it's okay if we move to the guest house. I was scaring them. They were afraid of their father. I didn't know what was going on. And my wife came back, picked her up from the airport, never said a word to her. Not a word. She got home and never said a word. I said, Rob, what's going on? Never said a word. She burst into tears. The only time I saw her in tears. And I start realizing I need help. And so anyway, I called the VA. Hardest thing I ever did. I didn't want it, but I knew something was wrong. You know, I'm a Christian. I'm a pastor. This stuff's not supposed to be happening. And they said, we'll call you back. I remember I was in my bedroom. I get a phone call. It was the VA. They said it's who they were. My heart sunk. They said, Reverend Scholten wants to take 20 minutes. It took almost 40 minutes. And I walked myself into a corner 3 times. And I remember saying, Robert, are you there? I go, yeah. And he says, no. And then he says, Mr. Scholten, you still there? You still there? I go, yeah. You still haven't answered our question. And I went silent again for another few minutes. I said, Scholten, you still there? You still there? I go, yeah. You still haven't answered our question. He goes, why not? And he said, do you want to harm yourself? I go, no. But I've tried. But no, I'm not now. And then I'm praying the whole time, God, don't let my wife come in and hear this. I don't know what's going on. How in the world am I going to explain it to her? And, well, then they said, well, a little bit later I wound up November and December of 2007. I was in the Lexington VA hospital, PTSD, in-house, and basically locked me up for 6 weeks. And probably the best thing ever happened. I had to deal with stuff. But I did something stupid. I fought it. And I fought it so hard I had a stroke. And then eventually I had to tell him, I can't read this stuff. What do you mean you can't read it? It's just letters coming up. So after all that, I had to go up to the Lexington VA weekly, a couple of times a week, for months, for speech therapy, to learn how to read again, and concentration. So it did a job on me. But I'm still here. My wife still loves me. My children love me. My congregation loves me. I love me. My God loves me. But I didn't realize the depths of it. But while there, I had a flashback. I went to, they have a little room. You can go get crafts. I went and got a craft. I went to the day room. And I know why I'm there, but I don't know the depth of it. And I had a moccasin. I was going to make a moccasin. And so I laid everything out. Here's the sole of the moccasin. And then the long leather stitching. And I put that long cord into the needle. And I went to put that needle into the hole, into that sole. I had a flashback. When I was 5 years old, my father, who was a World War II veteran, didn't speak much. Didn't speak at all, hardly. Very good man, very kind man, but boy, could he explode. Went back to, when I was 5 years old, he was in the VA hospital in Chicago. They called it a nervous breakdown. And he made my sister a pair of moccasins. Huh. 50-some years later, I'm in the VA hospital, doing the same thing, for the same reason. Didn't know the depth of it. Now I can understand my father. I can understand my uncles. But it took a long time.
What message would you like to leave for future generations who will view this interview?
You gotta take the Lord with you. I was a Christian in that one. Okay. And it's that's how I got my nickname, preacher. I memorized Psalm 25, and this is what I took with me. To you, O Lord, I lift up my soul. O my God, I trust in you. Let me not be ashamed. Let not my enemies triumph over me. Indeed, let none who wait on you be ashamed. Let those be ashamed who deal treacherously without you. It's not about me. I thank God for my time in the military. I thank God for my time in Vietnam with my crews. I wouldn't want to go through it again. We need, how can I put it? I wish, I pray that the morality in the military be the morality in civilian life. That the discipline in the military be the discipline in civilian life. Yes, sir, no, sir. You have a job to do, do it. You didn't live for yourself. If you lived for yourself, everyone's going to die. You live for the other person. You got to do that. When we were on our crew for 10 months, it wasn't about me. It was about our crew, our family. The crew became the family. It was about them. And then it wasn't just about us. We had to protect everyone behind us. So it's about all of them. That's what's missing, it seems. So when we become number one, it destroys everything. And so I guess it would be, don't put first. Be right with the Lord. Be right with each other. Love. Love. It's a lot harder than you think. Be prepared to say, I'm sorry. And a funny thing, I remember one of the first times I really had to say, forgive me, to one of my daughters was, they were always unraveling the toilet paper in the bathroom. And I was getting mad. And I was really, upset. And he said, Daddy, we're not doing that. I said, yes, you are. I know I'm not. I know Mom's not. So you're doing it. Daddy, we're not doing it. And I was accusing him. This went on for weeks. I'm about ready to become my dad and explode. While I'm sitting on the commode, toilet paper's over here, and the heat went on. Heat vent was right underneath it, and the toilet paper unrolled. Right before my eyes. I go, uh-oh. And I had to go get down on my knees in front of my daughters and say, I'm sorry. And I guess more people ought to be, we all ought to learn how to say, I love you. I'm sorry, forgive me. 3 short sentences that could change a lot of lives. But,
Is there anything you feel like we haven't discussed or should be added to this interview?
We're living in turmoil times. We will always need a military. Always will. And I'm afraid our nation's not ready for what could be. We're too complacent, too undisciplined. We haven't seen a war on our shores. And I pray to God we don't. But I also hope to pray that we don't have one. But you always got to be prepared. The Bible says there'll be wars and rumors of wars. And so we're going to have young men and women, families, be able to step up. But also families within the nation to step up to support them. Right now, less than 1% of eligible people are serving in the military. I'd like to ask the question, what percentage of 99 are praying for them and thinking about them? I hope they are. America's a great nation.